Dr. Reed, I suppose.
Survival horror has evolved over the years and taken many forms along the way, from straight-out action shooting, where every bullet counts, to an emphasis on stealth and your ability to keep quiet while you hide from your enemies in the shadows. Stealth horror might be a popular subgenre of survival horror now, but its roots actually go back much further. For instance, did you know games like Remothered Tormented Fathers and Alien Isolation were inspired arguably by one of the first survival horror titles, Clock Tower, and that many of the gameplay elements we now take for granted were first conceived in this 1994 game by now defunct Human Entertainment. Let's have a look at why this is the case and consider the role they'll play in the upcoming sequel to Remothered Tormented Fathers, Remothered Broken Porcelain. Created by Hifumi Komo, Clock Tower was somewhat of a work of self-indulgence and a self-proclaimed love letter to Dario Argento's 1985 Phenomena. We can see the similarities and inspiration, particularly around the central plot and artistic styling, which mirrors much of Argento's visual language. Much like Argento's films, Como wanted to create a narrative littered with genuine moments of panic and a way in which he could instill real fear in players. This was done through a combination of uncertainty, claustrophobia, moments of acute panic, and vulnerability. When is the main antagonist, Scissorman, going to appear? The rooms throughout our environment are quite small, so it will be difficult to evade him when we have to. Will we get any audio cues? He usually enters accompanied by his theme music, even when in the midst of a puzzle. Finally, you're vulnerable because you don't have any weapons, so running and hiding is the only real possibility. Como, much like Kojima while working on Metal Gear before him in 1987, was initially met with resistance that the game would focus on stealth rather than combat. Executives worried about how the unusual concept of hide and seek would go down with players, but their fears were unfounded, and the first Clock Tower was regarded as a critical success amongst gamers and the gaming media. History was made, and this style of gameplay would be incorporated on a more regular basis in many games, and now there's been somewhat of a resurgence of the stealth horror genre that's wildly popular on YouTube. Amnesia, Outlast, and Alien Isolation, in which the gameplay mechanics revolve around hiding from enemies rather than confronting them. Even Bloober Team's The Medium, which I made a video of last week, looks to have elements of hide and seek involved. So how did this all translate to Remothered Tormented Fathers, and how is it likely to continue in Remothered Broken Porcelain? Remember the combination of uncertainty, claustrophobia, jump scares and vulnerability. Let's take a look at those again, but within the context of the Remothered series. In Clock Tower, when players try to solve puzzles, traditionally a part of the game in which the player can breathe, Scissorman could still attack you. Therefore, there's a degree of uncertainty and vulnerability as you try to make your way through the game, but we'll talk more about that shortly. Lots of stealth horror games, while initially producing fear through uncertainty, can unfortunately become predictable the further you venture into the game. In Remothered Tormented Fathers, I never found the stalker that prevails throughout the mansion too predictable, and this really made me consider how I should approach objectives without being caught. You can imagine if the stalker did become too predictable, the immersion of the game would have been ruined, the tension lost, and likely to result in a game that becomes a chore to play and loses any organic tension. In order to combat this, the best stealth horror titles embrace uncertainty, ensuring that no matter what the player is doing at any given time, the element of surprise is always there. Therefore, a constant sense of dread prevails. As with Clock Tower, your profession within the Remothered series means that you generally have no reason to carry any weapons. With no way to protect yourself, your only viable option is to run and hide, and hiding doesn't entirely result in not being captured. Clock Tower even went so far as showing a stamina indicator for the main character when stamina is low. This results in her being more prone to tripping and falling, allowing Scissorman a greater opportunity to capture her. Love it or hate it, this is a consistent principle within the stealth horror genre in which you can't fight, and one that is key above all others in creating a feeling of tension within the player. In any other game, an enemy approaching would get the end of a gun, thus removing all tension. However, as the protagonist in Remothered has no access to weaponry, only the occasional item to stun, the fear and tension is persistent until we evade the enemy completely. With Broken Porcelain, it's reasonable to expect the core gameplay mechanic to continue, with potentially more reason to feel vulnerable, because we might have to look after other characters, or because we could face scenarios in which multiple antagonists hunt us down. Claustrophobia is yet another example of how the Remothered series reflects the level design of Clock Tower. Dimly lit hallways, rickety floorboards, and tiny spaces you must squeeze yourself into in the hope that you can hide just in time. Being seen isn't just an issue in these games, but being heard as well. Tight spaces and a maniac pursuing you relentlessly has all the hallmarks of creating tension and anxiety within the player. While the setting of the first Remothered took place in a mansion, the second title looks as though it will primarily take place in the Ashman Inn, a large hotel owned by the Ashmans. This opens up the possibilities of being chased down by multiple characters in confined spaces. Being enclosed makes us feel a constant sense of dread because, quite frankly, nothing feels like a safe space, and nothing likely will for the duration of the game. Combine this sense of claustrophobia with uncertainty and vulnerability, and you will begin to question if anywhere in the game is safe. What would a good stealth horror game be without the trademark jump scare? Intentionally or not, the climax of being potentially captured, or the terrifying crescendo of music as the villain gets even closer, is reason to quite literally jump out of your seat. Stay the course, keep your cool, and maybe you'll get away. Let the panic take over, and it's lights out for sure as you scramble to find a way to escape the clutches of the enemy. Not everyone is a fan of stealth horror, often regarded as a glorified walking simulator with the occasional scare. But I think that does them a huge disservice. We ought to praise game designers and developers for making more bold choices and going against the grain of the norm. Given that Clock Tower has left such an amazing legacy, it's genuinely fascinating to see those early design concepts incorporated into more modern titles. Even with Tormented Fathers' shortcomings, it was still a great and at times genuinely scary experience. A great homage to Clock Tower and a nod to Dario Argento's classic work. I'm looking forward to playing Broken Porcelain, and with the release date of October the 20th, it will be released just in time for Halloween.